Did any of you happen to watch the Hillsborough MPO workshop on managed lanes this morning?
I could not make that. I wanted to make that, but had a conflict.
Yeah, it was.
I watched it.
Did you? I thought it was more interesting than I expected.
Yeah, it's funny. Managed lanes and congestion pricing. That was my primary area of research at Cutter, and I'm amazed that there's always still something new to learn.
Yeah, I'll bet. I was a little surprised on the strong emphasis on equity. But for that commission, for that MPO, it's an important issue.
Paul, how are you? I see you in the meeting as well. You're on mute. Just want to let you know I see you there.
Good afternoon, Chris. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, Paul. Good to have you with us.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, you all.
Mr. Widmer, good to see you.
Likewise.
It's 1:30. I see, Jennifer, I see 7 members here, including Bill. I don't know if that's enough for a quorum or if we need to wait a minute or two.
No, because this is a larger group, we have to have 10.
Okay.
The only thing we're voting on today, though, are the minutes. So if we have to, we can always push it to the New Year's meeting.
Okay.
Or I'll circle back if we get more members. Okay, Chris, I'm ready if you are.
I'm ready, Jennifer. All good? You can proceed whenever you like.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. We'll call this October meeting of the Citizens Advisory Committee for TBARTA to order. We'll start with a roll call, Jennifer, of those online.
Okay. Bob Pinion.
Bob, you're muted.
You're muted, but I see you. It's okay.
Okay.
Bill Roberts.
Here.
Here. Brian Kazmierkowski. Bob Widmer.
Here.
Lynn Gruber White.
Here.
Josh Frank.
Here.
Richard Bedford. And I don't know if everybody knows yet, but we no longer have Kelly Miller. So I believe Richard Balcom is on the line.
Hey, good afternoon to all.
Thank you. Travis Norton. Leonardo DeSoritz. Bill Johnson.
Sorry.
David Goodwin. Rick Richmond.
Here.
Rob Serku. Karen Mullins.
Here.
Walter Arouk. And Sarah Calhoun. Okay. So we do have 8 right now.
Good. All right. Thank you, Jennifer. Welcome, Mr. Malcolm. Good to have you with us today.
Good to,
Yeah.
Mhm.
The next item on our agenda is the public comment. Jerry Bowers, do we have anyone signed up for public comment?
Hello, guys. Good afternoon. I'm Terry Bowers. I'm with TBARTA staff, and I'll be monitoring the public comment line. At this time, we do not have any public comments to share.
Okay. Thank you very much. Being no public comment, the next item is our consent agenda, which is the approval of the minutes from our August meeting. Mr. Johnson, do you have a question? You're muted still, Bill.
I have a correction, if I may.
Certainly.
The last item, members' interest. This month, members expressed an interest in hearing about future legislative funding. The thing that I recall was a request from myself to hear about future local funding for the RRT project. So I don't know if that's a correction or an addition.
If it was
I would probably
your
be in addition because I didn't hear that. So I will go back and take a listen.
we'll
But I did
make
note that.
motion.
I did note that, but we still are not able to take a vote at this time because we do have 9. We would need 1 more.
Okay. Any other comments on the minutes? If not, we'll move on and come back and try to get approval on the minutes. All right. The first presentation on our schedule is the RRT update. Mr. Pringle. Scott, are you ready?
I am. Good afternoon, CAC members. Thank
Welcome.
you for having me this afternoon. Brian, I don't know if you wanted to say a few introductory remarks or if you'd rather I just jump into it.
I'll let you, excuse me, I'll let you just take it away.
Okay, thanks, Brian.
Scott,
So with that, Chris, if you don't mind starting with-
Scott, I'm having a little difficulty hearing you.
Okay.
One second, Scott, I'll get you up here. Hang on one second.
The volume issue. Thank you.
I think we're good to go.
Let me just switch my mic over.
Okay.
So that you can hear me a little bit better. Does that improve the audio quality?
For me, it does.
Okay.
Yes, it does. Thank you. Scott.
Yep, no problem. Sorry about that. So we've made quite a bit of progress on the Regional Rapid Transit Project. I'm excited to walk you through a number of different items this afternoon. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Scott Pringle. I'm the project manager from the consultant side, WSP specifically. So next slide, Chris. I know this group has seen this, but just a quick reminder of what the purpose behind the project is, which is something that's regional, something that's quick, safe, and reliable and frequent. Next slide. Since the last time we've met, we had the opportunity to present the different alternative options for alignments along the 41-mile corridor. We brought this forward to the TBARTA board and got a recommendation to advance these 3 alternatives that you see on your slide. So from moving left to right, alternative 1 is basically our baseline scenario or alternative, which we compare all other alternatives to. And this is really taking advantage of what TB Next is providing in terms of bus on shoulder operations or using the express lanes. Now, when we move to sort of our build alternatives 3 and 5, you'll notice on the map there is the dark purple lines. That's where we have space for a dedicated BRT lane. In alternative 3, what the board approved was looking at those dedicated BRT lanes up into for alternative 3, up to the gateway area, using express lanes across the Howard Franklin Bridge, part of the FDOT reconstruction of the southbound Howard Franklin Bridge span. Back in dedicated lanes between West Shore and downtown Tampa, and then all the way up to Pasco from Tampa. That was one of the points of discussion in June. We did some preliminary costs and definitely weighted against the benefits for adding dedicated lane up to Pasco, and it really showed quite well. And there was a lot of advantage to that, and the board was quite pleased with that and asked us to advance that to the next phase. Alternative 5, very similar to Alternative 3, with the exception of how we treat the crossing of Old Tampa Bay, specifically looking at maybe some space for a dedicated BRT lane across the Howard Franklin Bridge instead of using those express lanes. Next slide, please. So Friday, we'll be updating the board on what you're seeing here today, which we're going to really focus on stations and vehicles, with the goal of moving towards bringing a recommended alternative to the board in January, so that we can then begin our conversations and request approval to enter into the Federal Transit Administration Capital Investment Grant Program. That's the New Starts Program, Small Starts Program. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned today, we're going to talk a little bit about our beginnings of the vehicle assessment. And I actually have Bill Ball with me today. He's also on our consultant team. He's actually going to walk you through some of the research that we've conducted to date on possible vehicles for the project. Following that, I'm going to give an update on, we've done quite a bit of work on identifying some station site opportunities for the project, and I'll show you where we are with that, and then conclude this afternoon's conversation with some design concepts and a conversation about parking. So with that, I'll actually ask Mr. Ball to go ahead and walk you through our vehicle assessment process. Bill?
Thank you, Scott, and Mr. Chair, members of the committee. This is Bill Ball with Tyndall Oliver, and we're working closely with Scott on a number of items related to regional rapid transit. I'm going to talk a little bit about where we are with the vehicle assessment to date. And as you see on this slide, there's a lot to learn about what different vehicles look like. We've so far documented 9 vehicle manufacturers and the types of vehicles they offer. You can see from the photographs, they range from very traditional looking to very stylized looking. They range in length and capacity, from the shorter vehicles all the way up to the articulated 60-foot vehicles that you see in the slide as well. Next slide. But we wanted to identify some key criteria to guide the evaluation of vehicles. And the number one criterion for us is the seating capacity. When we look at demand, we want to make sure that we're identifying vehicles that correspond with that demand. The other criteria that we're looking at also on this slide relates to the technology, what type of fuel, what type of vehicle propulsion system it has, as well as passenger comfort and the experience of the rider, and then finally a vehicle cost. So I'm going to highlight some of the results of where we are to date and get you up to speed on that. And we do have much more work to do on this as well. Next slide. So starting with seating capacity, we want to look at the projected ridership, and we have an operating plan that we've been working with Scott and the team on. And with that, we have some preliminary ridership projections that Scott has shared with previous presentations. And we want to look at peak loads to correspond with the capacity that are offered by those vehicles, so that we can identify an optimal seating capacity range, and recognize that we also want to look at wheelchair and bicycle accommodations. This example on the slide is the Sunrunner for PSTA. You can show this seating arrangement is up to 31 seats, and it also accommodates 2 wheelchairs and 4 bicycles on the bus. So we want to take into consideration all of these capacity issues as we evaluate the different vehicle technologies. Next slide. So back to ridership. When we look at the current operating plan and the ridership projections, we're seeing at this point a maximum peak bus load, which means the maximum trip that a bus makes on the service that we're planning, how many riders would be on that in the maximum. And right now that's looking to be in the 40 to 45 rider range. So we want to make sure that we have a seating capacity range that accommodates that. So to narrow the focus of some of the vehicles we're looking at, we set an optimal seating capacity range of 35 to 50 riders. But the bottom line is to have capacity meet demand. Next slide. And if you look at this, this has the 9 vehicle manufacturers down the left side, and it shows the low and high range of seating capacity of the vehicles that these manufacturers offer. So basically you can see that range of vehicles that are at the low, at the high, and in between. And if you hit the next slide, Chris, you'll see the optimal capacity being 35 to 50. So what it really does is it shows that each of these manufacturers offers vehicles that fall within the range, but it does eliminate some of the smaller vehicles, and it does eliminate some of the larger vehicles, those articulated vehicles that have in the range of 60 passenger capacity. So what we're proposing is we narrow that focus to that optimal range from 35 to 50 seats. Next slide. So the next criterion was technology, and looking at the fueling options or the propulsion options, depending what type of technology it is. You can see the 5 major technologies that we looked at, from diesel, CNG, hybrid, hydrogen, fuel cell, and battery electric. I'll talk briefly about autonomous as well. We don't want to rule that out because it depends on where technology is at the time we're ready to acquire these vehicles. Next slide. So this looks at the history of bus service fleets around the country, dating back to the mid-90s, basically. And you can see how the technologies have changed and how diesel has declined over time, and more alternative fuel vehicles are being used by bus systems around the country. So clearly there's a move towards those alternative fuels, and basically the ones that I'm talking about today as well. So it's something that we need to consider in making that decision about which technology we want to pursue for the regional rapid transit. Next slide. This table shows recent BRT systems that have been implemented around the country or are being implemented, and it gives you a sense of what vehicles they selected. So if you look at that second column, you can see that most of them are actually alternatives to diesel. We've got some battery electric, we've got some CNG, and we've got some hybrid ones, including the Sunrunner at PSTA. So clearly we need to take a close look at the alternative technologies that are available as we look at the options for regional rapid transit. There's other information on this slide as well about those vehicles, and we're certainly using them to help guide our decisions as well. Next slide. So if you look at vehicle technologies, it's important to look at the vehicle range. How far can you drive on a tank of fuel or on a full charge? And basically you see that range varies from 525 miles for hybrid all the way down to the battery electric is about 175 miles. So there is a range of possibilities in terms of how far you can drive a vehicle on a single charge or a single tank of fuel. Next slide. We do want to make sure that we're adaptable, because right now we're evaluating vehicle technologies with the information we have today. And of course, technology is changing rapidly. If we were to implement and acquire vehicles today, we probably would not be looking at any of the future is electric, potentially electric, but the future is automated in particular, not quite ready for the type of service that we're offering with RRT with the technology that's today. But in a few years, by the time we're ready to purchase these vehicles, we just need to monitor where that technology stands to see if and make sure that we're able to adapt if the technology is there and it makes sense for this service. Next slide. Next criterion related to passenger comfort and experience. And the point here is that each of the technologies and the vehicle manufacturers have different benefits to them. For example, a commuter coach has those seats that face forward. They're generally more comfortable. They're designed for longer trips on the freeway. Whereas a more traditional BRT vehicle has the level boarding like in the bottom picture, or low floor boarding that allows for that level boarding, but it has the other characteristics of a bus that don't make it as comfortable, and there's more noise associated with it. I'll give you an example. When we talked to the Flatiron Flyer out in Denver, when they implemented their service, originally they were leaning towards a BRT bus like on the bottom, but when they went and visited Los Angeles and saw some examples, the lesson they learned was it was very noisy. And if they were going to drive at a high speed on an interstate, they may not want to have that noise and have the quieter commuter coach that has the more comfortable seating. Now, there's pros and cons to both of those. So those are just some examples of what we're looking at as we go through this vehicle assessment process. Next slide. And then I'll conclude with the vehicle costs. This is a range of costs that we're observing from other systems that have acquired these vehicles in recent years. You can see that the alternative fuels are more expensive than the traditional diesel fuels. So there's a range of costs within each of those, depending on the features and the size of the vehicle that you acquire within that technology as well. So we do have this basic information to give a feel for that range of cost, and we're continuing to evaluate this and other criteria as we go forward, especially when we're looking behind the scenes at the performance of each of these technologies, and we'll be continuing to evaluate them as we go forward. And that's a quick update on Scott. I don't know if you want to answer questions now or wait until you're completed before we take questions.
Actually, Mr. Chair, since we do have a couple of different distinct modules to present this afternoon, I don't mind taking questions now since we're on the topic of vehicles.
Okay, that'll be fine. Are there any questions of either Bill or Scott at this point?
Yeah, I have two.
And Karen Mullins has raised her hand as well.
Okay. All right. I think that was Bob. Did you have a question, Bob?
Yeah, two questions. Bill, when you talk about hybrid, do you only mean diesel electric or are there other combinations?
Yes, I am. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, and the second question is, since Pinellas and their Sunrunner have already done something in the local area, is there anything that we can leverage there to fast track, to use to
Sure.
fast track our stuff? Okay, thank you.
Sure. The first question, yes, I'm talking about the hybrid electric. That's the diesel hybrid. And that's generally what the industry considers hybrid in the current technologies that are out there today. And secondly, we are talking to HART and PSTA as they continue on the path towards BRT systems to make sure that if there's anything to leverage or economies to take advantage of, that we'll have that information available to help make the decision.
Thank you.
Karen Mullins is also raising her hand.
Karen, you're recognized.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. My question is, what are we forecasting for how many vehicles that we're going to need to start this up? Where are they going to be placed? Are we even at that juncture?
Well, Scott, I don't know if you have those numbers in front of you. We are working on the operating plan to correspond with the different alternatives that we're looking at now. We certainly haven't gone to the stage of the detailed operating plan to answer specific to those questions. But I don't know if you want to share that at this point yet, Scott, or not.
Yeah, we're looking at a number of different alternatives in the way we conduct the operations for the project. Because keep in mind, what we found seemed to work the best was not a service that goes all the way from St. Pete to Wesley Chapel and back, not that A to B service. What is performing the best is where we actually have multiple routes using the corridor with what we call branches that can come off the alignment and make those direct connections to the neighborhoods and to local transit. But it does require a slightly larger fleet to do those multiple routes. So that's what we're looking at now. So again, weighing the pros and cons, the additional cost for the fleet versus the ability to, better connect with our local transit partners and get those connections to the neighborhoods.
Right.
So we're still working on that now.
So you're talking about feeder routes to the BRT line. I was assuming, and of course that is a bad thing to do, that we were going to utilize PSTA and HART for those feeder routes. Is that not?
So it's actually both. The nice thing is HART, PSTA, and PCBT are on our executive team, which we meet with them routinely. So we're looking at two things. We've got our project routes, so kind of the routes that are for the RRT that branch out into the neighborhoods. But at the same time, we're also working with PSTA and HART, and they've already identified opportunities where we can refine their local transit network to come to a central point. So in some cases, for example, we go to PSTA, and other station areas, there's a good potential like Gateway where they may just come to us. So it's going to be both items.
Wow, just wow. That's going to be an awkward transit. I mean, we're working with the key people right now, and I hope that we can continue moving forward for this goal. But yeah, that's monumental. As far as even fare charges. HART and PSTA can't even come together with that for the most part to make it one. You know, they have one, but it's astronomical at this point for most people. Yeah, it's going to be a mixed bag for that. All right, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
no
you.
worries. Yeah, I
Thank
agree.
you.
We've got our work cut out for us, but we've made good progress. Like I said, we've got some ideas. We're flushing through the executive team. And in terms of where we actually keep vehicles, what the fare structure is, I mean, we're going to continue working on this through the rest of this year, well into next year. You know, and it'll be a concurrent path as we're continuing down the path of doing design and doing the environmental work. We're going to keep looking at the best operations plan to come up with what we call a proof of concept, which is what we then take to FTA and to our partners.
Other questions for Bill or for Scott?
Karen Schwartz had her hand raised earlier, and I admitted her to the panel, but I don't know if there's a question there.
Karen? I don't
Perhaps
see
not.
you.
Rick Richmond is raising his hand, though.
Rick, go ahead.
Thank you, Bill. Just one thing I don't see on the slides, we are comparing costs between different technologies. What about maintenance costs over the life of each of those to compare for O&M costs?
We actually have pulled that information together, and we just held it back in terms of getting into that level of detail with the committee and the board at this point. We
Perfect.
maybe want to narrow the focus a little bit more before we get into that level of detail with the board.
Great, thank you.
And
Karen has her hand raised if you want to recognize her.
And
Karen, please.
Mentioned it's also the operations and maintenance of these different technologies, but in the case of all electric, it's the infrastructure you need to support it as well.
All right. Karen Schwartz?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Ah, great. So when you look at the cost of the various types of vehicles, of course, the alternative fuel ones are more expensive. You know, the sunk cost at the beginning is more. But have you also looked at the cost of, you know, operations costs down the line for the different types of vehicles?
Absolutely. And I think that's what we're saying, is that we haven't brought that information to you yet, but certainly there's pros and cons of the upfront costs versus the operating and maintenance cost that comes later. And that's where you see some of the alternative fuels become, you get that return on investment through the operating and maintenance over time. So clearly that's a great point that you make, and that we are looking at that. It's just a question of when we bring that level of detail to you and the board.
Okay.
Bill, I have one question. Talking about the vehicles themselves, help the committee understand how you have balanced seating capacity versus frequency of pickup and drop off. Have you gotten into that yet?
Well, we have assumed a transit operating plan to make the early decisions about the optimal seating capacity range. And that is how we come up with the maximum peak load on a vehicle that we see on a given trip within the network, so that we know that we're designing a system, we know what kind of ridership we might anticipate, and then we pick vehicles that match and correspond with that demand that we're estimating with the current operating plan. The point is, when we refine and finalize that operating plan, that could change a little bit. That optimal capacity range could change based on how we approach the service that's provided on the corridor. Scott mentioned that branching, and depending on how we balance the branching with the core service along the main corridor will determine the number of vehicles and therefore the size of vehicles that tie back to the demand.
Okay, yeah, this is the first time I've heard of the branching concept, so that's going to take some thought. Thanks for bringing that to us. Other questions on the vehicle portion of the presentation? Okay, Scott, I think you can move forward.
So Chris, if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide. So as I mentioned previously, we've been spending and made quite a bit of progress on looking at the station areas, specifically focused on what are our site opportunities for an actual station and where should we start that conversation, what makes sense, and probably most importantly is once we identified where we think we need to be for a station, is there an opportunity to start engaging in conversations with either the private sector or a public partner to actually move forward to implement a station. So we've taken multiple bites at the apple. Each iteration, we've done 3 screens of technical analysis in terms of parcel opportunities, both offline and inline station opportunities. We've been routinely working with the business working group and our station area working group, which has been fantastic. The station area working group has been provided a lot of really great input. Those are the folks that are from the MPO, from the Planning Commission. So, these are the folks that really know the individual makeup and characteristics of each one of these station areas. Everything's data driven. And the goal is that we're identifying a handful of top site opportunities, but keep in mind this is a technical analysis. We haven't had that conversation yet with the actual owners of said properties. That would be the next step. So these will change as it becomes more refined and more details come online, but it's a great starting point to the conversation and actually gives us an opportunity, like I said, to start looking and seeking potential partnerships for each individual station area. So with that, next slide. So back one. So in our last screening, which is I'm going to show you the results here, we broke it out into 4 primary categories. The first category, we looked at the cost and feasibility of each site opportunity. Now, keep in mind, we're looking at, in some cases, we're looking at 100+ parcels within each individual station area. And what we're talking about is how much investment is required to get from said parcel to the primary RRT alignment. And that's what that first category really is focused on. But we also look at safety and congestion. Again, it's how easy, how costly is it to get from the parcel to the main alignment. The next category is equity and visibility. Really, the focus here is, how many affordable housing units are available within 1,000 feet of that parcel, so easy walking distance within that parcel. And then how many transit-dependent population or households are we serving within 1,000 feet of each one of those parcels? Next slide, please. The last 2 criteria is community accessibility. So we ran an entire detailed accessibility analysis where we calculated how many homes are in a 5-minute walk from the parcel. How many jobs are within a 5-minute walk of that parcel? And we took into account the street network, availability of sidewalks, crosswalks, and the like. And then the second half of that category is bike distance. So in that case, we're looking at a 10-minute bike ride. But again, how many homes do we serve within a 10-minute bike ride, and how many jobs are available within a 10-minute bike ride of that parcel?
Scott, how many feet in 5-minute walk?
How many feet total?
In a 5-minute walk, is that?
It varies, Bill. It really depends upon the local street network, the availability of sidewalks and crosswalks. So in a case where you've got, for example, I think Pasco is a good example where the local street network, the blocks are much larger than you would have, say, in the West Shore area. So you have a much smaller walk radii from individual parcels because it just, sorry?
Quarter mile?
It varies. I'd have to get that answer for you, Bill, but it depends on each individual parcel because it's a calculation of time. So we looked at is, 5-minute walk distance gets you access to this many homes or this many jobs.
Okay.
And then the last category is economic development. And we looked at the opportunities for redevelopment, what we call soft sites. These are parcels where the value of the land is starting to become, it has more value in relationship to the actual building that sits on it. So we're really looking for those indicators of economic development or redevelopment potential. And then we again, same principle as the accessibility. We looked at how many of those redevelopment sites are within 1,000 feet of each individual parcel. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we're only comparing parcels within each station area. So we're not comparing parcels in Wesley Chapel to the Gateway area. The scoring criteria is very simple. It was just a 3-point score, good, better, best, and then we averaged them by those 4 categories. Next slide, please. So the first station area I'm going to walk you through is State Route 54. This is our end of line, beginning of line station, depends upon your perspective, in Pasco. Next slide, please. And we started with a total of 11 sites that advanced from the Screen 1, Screen 2 analysis with support from our working groups. You can see them listed here. It also includes, you can see at the bottom of the slide, we created a fictionary sorry, parcel that would represent an inline station opportunity. Now that's not a real parcel, but we're looking at, you know, if we had a station that was actually right within the interstate environment, you know, what would that give us? What are the benefits of that? And we applied that parcel to the same scrutiny that we're doing to all the offline parcels as well. So next slide, please. So gold, the parcels outlined in gold are those that receive the top scores in each category. Blue is the second highest score. You can see each one of the different criteria, the cost of feasibility, equity, community access, and economic development. Next slide, please. And what we're finding in Pasco, and it's no surprise here because when we talked to the stakeholders, even back in February, you know, the focus was very much around, you know, being close to the grove. There's a lot of new development activity occurring there, a lot of great opportunity. Pasco County staff members really identified that. And what we're doing is we're actually advancing the top 3 parcel locations. You can see them listed here. And like I said, the focus is, you know, getting close to the groves, being part of the new economic development opportunity. That one of those sites right there, which are actually ranked 5th, we found out from Pasco County is actually a new multi-family development that's going in there, which further supports that area as being a great location for a station. We not looking at the inline station. We do need to get out of the interstate environment to turn the vehicle around literally and get it headed back the other direction, heading south. And it's also a great opportunity to have some amenities for drivers and the alike. So next slide, please. So next down, the next community station is Bears. You'll notice that we're not right now looking at the intermodal centers as that's being conducted under a separate work effort by FDOT. So we're focused on our community stations. The next one being Bears. The top 12 sites, you can see them here. Again, we created, you know, a parcel to represent an inline station right over the top of the Bears interchange with 275. Next slide, please. Again, you can see how each one of the parcels ranked in terms of each one of the 4 criteria. Next slide, please. And in this case, in Bears, the top 3 that the stationary working group asked us to advance represent one inline. So that inline parcel ranked 3rd. Right, again, like I mentioned, it's you know, right near the Bears interchange. Or the other 2 offline options or neighborhood station potentials was either the CarMax or the used car dealership right at the corner of Nebraska and Bears. Now, both of those parcels are privately held, owned, so obviously there'd have to be a conversation there to see if if those private owners were interested or willing to partner with the project. And one of the drawbacks is, you know, we have the advantage of using the interchange at Bears to get down to street level, but Bears does experience some pretty significant congestion during the peak hour, especially at least pre-pandemic. Whereas the inline station, obviously accessibility is great because you're right there, right next to the alignment, but there is going to be some infrastructure involved to actually build and construct that particular site. So I think this is a great opportunity to have a couple of varied options that we're bringing into the next phase. Like I said, 1 inline and 2 neighborhood station options. Next slide, please. So the next station down, skipping over the USF Intermodal Center, is Waters Avenue or Bird Street. Next slide, please. Here we have 13 sites, including 3 potential inline options. We looked at an inline option all the way up at Bush Boulevard. We looked at an inline option at Waters as well as Bird Street. And then again, a number of parcels that survived the first couple of levels of screening, mostly clustered in and around that area between Waters and Bird. Next slide, please. Again, you can see how the different parcels ranked in terms of each one of those 4 categories or 4 criteria. Next slide, please. And what what the stakeholder working group has asked us to advance here is actually the top 4. So you'll notice that based on our scoring, the 2 inline stations are performing quite well in the Waters Bird area, but a lot of it has to do with the fact that, when we're moving sort of further south on the interstate corridor and we get in between that Waters Bird area, we're getting great accessibility to the transit dependent populations, to affordable housing. The walk bike access is pretty good here. And we definitely have some economic development potential. Quite honestly, out of any of the station areas, I think this particular station area has some of the greatest potential for economic development, given the dog track is there and some old aging big box uses on the west side. So what we've been asked to do is move forward with the top 2 inline stations. But again, that requires some investment into making those stations work. Whereas we're also looking at 2 neighborhood station options, either on the east or west side of the corridor between Waters and Bird. Like I said, either the dog track or where the old Kmart used to be. And we're definitely paying attention to how we connect into other projects. For example, HART is looking at a future arterial BRT project on Florida Avenue. And it would be a great opportunity to marry those 2 projects at this location. And that site to the west might be a great opportunity for a station where both services connect to. So with that, next slide, please. So now we're jumping down to the Seminole Tampa Heights area. Next slide. You can see the parcels that advanced into the 3rd screen here. You'll notice a striking difference. I mean, these parcels are much smaller. There aren't very many concentrations of opportunities. There's some opportunities along Osborne. We are also looking at a couple of opportunities along Lake. We did evaluate 2 inline station opportunities, one at Osborne and another at Lake. Next slide, please. Same as the format as before, you can see how each one of the parcels ranked against those different evaluation criteria. Next slide, please. So this one was interesting. The Heights neighborhood definitely presented a challenge. All the parcels that were rising to the top in our scoring criteria, were relatively close. And quite honestly, I think they all come with challenges. For example, the inline station at Lake scored well because we had the opportunity to connect to the Roble housing development there, the affordable housing, certainly a lot of access and opportunity to the neighborhood. But when we talked to the public, it was extremely clear that everyone in the neighborhood, all those that participated in our survey, were not interested in a major station here. They wanted a smaller station, something that was easy to walk up to. So we're definitely keeping that in mind. So, that inline station doesn't really fit what the community was telling us. Now, our second and third options, there's a couple of very small parcels on Nebraska that could be an option, and that's south of Lake. And the second ranking parcel was the Sacred Heart, the old Sacred Heart Academy. That has potential to be a historic resource in itself. So what we're finding is that, through the scoring criteria, the parcels that were rising to the top really have challenges to them. So we had a long conversation with both the business community and the stakeholder working group. And what we came to the conclusion on is that we probably should instead focus on a walk-up station, just like the community told us, and maybe look at an opportunity of using MLK to get out of the interstate environment, use that interchange there, and maybe co-locate a station with the Heart Arterial BRT, and then basically keep the station simple. Keep it walk up, keep it a small footprint, and really make sure that we're keeping in mind and listening to what the community was requesting us to do. Next slide, please. So Himes is our next community station. And as you can see, we jumped over the downtown Tampa Intermodal Center. Next slide, please. We had 15 sites that advanced into the final screening. We have one inline option there at Himes, and then the rest of the options were clustered around Spruce and Dale Maybury. Next slide, please. And again, you can see how they stacked up against our criteria. Quite honestly, we have, again, between the Watersburg station and the Himes area, I think these two stations have some of the greatest potential for economic development. When you look at that area on Dale Maybury, just north of the interstate, there's a lot of big box retail that is starting to age out, starting to cycle out. So there might be some opportunities there. And then there's a significant, especially when you get closer to Spruce, then, just beyond Dale Maybury, you start to have access to all the neighborhoods there. So you've got relatively good walk access, definitely some job access, and certainly good bike access there as well. Next slide, please. So we're actually carrying forward 5 different site options in Himes area, one inline there at Himes, but that inline station would require, again, it's going to require investment to actually construct that inline station. And because of the plans for TBNX and the Future Highway Program, that particular location is the most expensive of them all. So we're definitely keeping an eye on that. Whereas when we look at Dale Maybury, we do feel from an engineering side, a design side, that we might be able to get out on Dale Maybury and work our way up north to hit that corner of Dale Maybury and Spruce, which is those parcels that were really kind of ranking to the top, both first ranked and third ranked. And we're gonna look at those as neighborhood station opportunities. Again, they're all privately held, so we'd have to have that conversation and see if there's any opportunities. But we also might be able to, come off the corridor, go north on Dale Maybury, use Spruce to get over to Himes, and actually, if we need to circle and create basically a mini circulator in this area, so that if we need to even go further south of the corridor, south of 275, connect to the new Midtown development, that's also an option. So that's something we're definitely looking at very closely. Next slide, please. The last community station is in Pinellas at 62nd Avenue. Next slide, please. So we had 12 sites that went through the evaluation. Sorry, next slide, Chris. Thank you. You can see how they ranked here against different scoring criteria. When we look at accessibility and feasibility, the inline station at 62nd started to perform pretty well, but it was pretty obvious in terms of, accessibility to households and jobs, both walk and bike. The closer to 54th we were, the better we were able to make those connections. Next slide, please. So what we're finding is that our first and second ranked parcels are right there at Haynes and 54th. There's some retail there that maybe there's some potential for redevelopment. It gives us great access and connectivity to the surrounding neighborhoods. We also have an inline option at 62nd Avenue. So if we're going to look at that, slightly higher station cost and the investment associated with that, at 62nd, we don't have the interference from an interchange. So that helps in terms of design. It also really helps in terms of getting people from those neighborhoods to that station area. So in this case, we've actually got one inline station we're advancing and 2 neighborhood parcel opportunities that we're advancing. Next slide, please. So that's where we are with the sort of the station site opportunity analysis. I can continue forward, Mr. Chair, or I can pause and take questions.
Why don't we pause and see if there are questions? Questions from the committee. Thank you, Scott. Bob Henyon, you have a question?
Oh, you're on
Bob,
mute.
you're still muted. You're still on mute, Bob.
Okay, am I off now?
There you go. Start
Okay.
over.
I have a question. It's a criteria that I'm not sure was considered. And that would be with each one of these stations where you have to get off of the main inline area. I think one of the criteria we need to consider is how much time it adds to the trip. Because if you have 5 stations where you have to get off and each one's 6 minutes away, you're adding half an hour to a person's travel time overall.
No, great point. We definitely looked at the travel time. I mean, we looked at everything from what the congestion was on that street that's connecting to the project, how many signals the service would have to go through, so that signal density. And you'll notice that even the neighborhood parcels tended to be closer proximity to the main alignment. That's that very reason there, because those criteria were included. And the truth of the matter is, again, this is where, coming back to that branch operating plan that we talked about earlier, this is an advantage of that branch operating plan, because we can have a service that, for example, serves 62nd Avenue, but then does an express run to either St. Pete or downtown Tampa, and the next run actually skips 62nd and connects to the next station. So we're able to mitigate. We're trying to minimize the loss of travel time when we're at street level, but we can also kind of offset any time that we do lose by having these multiple routes that are catered to each one of these markets.
Great, Scott. I'm glad you're really putting that factor in there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Bill Johnson, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. And it's really the same question. You mentioned the Flatiron Run out in Denver, where the stations are, I think, immediately adjacent to the expressway, and there is minimal transit time. I know when I was out there years ago, there were a couple of stations where you did have to get off and wander back, and it really changed the character of the route and the attractiveness of it. So I'm surprised that there's so much offline station consideration.
Yeah, I mean, really it comes down to balancing all the different needs. So we recognize that being offline and in the neighborhood, we do a lot better job of connecting to local transit, making it easy for folks to bike and walk to that station, and as well as providing an opportunity for TOD or economic development. But on the flip side of that, we're always balancing against the speed that we talked about, how quickly it takes us to get from point A to point B. And again, balance it against, every time where we lose a couple minutes by jumping offline, that means that we might have to have another vehicle that we're putting into the project as a whole. So that begins to, affect our overall operations plan, as I discussed earlier. So we're going to continue to look at that.
Thank you, Scott. Josh, you have a question?
Yeah, I have a couple quick questions, Scott. I want to sort of dive into a little bit some of the assumptions that you guys have made along some of your station areas and the locations. I recognize what you said is you guys are looking at elements of TOD and walkability and connection to existing transit and future transit. I think that's all really important. But I'm curious, for your inline stations and for your offsite stations, are you anticipating or calculating those with the increased amount of capacity and trips that are being generated with TB Next in addition to what you guys are looking at today? Or is it just based off of today's figures? Because one of the things that doesn't really jive for me is that if you're looking at doing a neighborhood station, say on MLK, and your intent is for it to be walkable and bikeable and to have some TOD associated with it, I think that's fine. but there's also going to be an increased amount of traffic and congestion and vehicular trips associated with the expansion of the interstate as a precedent. So that's going to be a bit harder to achieve, knowing that overall trips are going up. So I'm just wondering, do you make that assumption as part of your calculus, or is that sort of part of, are you really strictly looking at what exists today?
So
and
that's
then
actually,
I have a follow-up too, once you're finished.
Sure. Sorry. Continue, or do you want me to address that? So to your point, in terms of looking at, which traffic volumes we're assuming, we're starting that process now. Again, we're just trying to identify the top handful of opportunities, and then we're going to continue to evaluate them. We are looking at, depending upon, which phase of the project ends up getting decided. That's a big conversation that's coming up here in the next couple months is, are we phasing this 41-mile project, or are we doing it all at one time? And if we are phasing it, what are those opening years is what we call it, that start of service year. And anytime we're evaluating that start of service year, we're going to take into consideration all the traffic volumes that are forecasted to exist at that time. So if we're looking at 2025 as our opening year, we're definitely going to look at TB Next segments 4 and 5, possibly 7 and possibly 2 in terms of those vehicle volumes. The nice thing is that we have the, outside running shoulders so that we are actually outside of that traffic congestion on the interstate itself. But you're right. The second we go through an existing interchange, especially an existing automobile interchange, we're going to deal with the same traffic that everybody else is really struggling with. So that's where those multiple routes hopefully will help us in sort of minimizing that lost time. But it's definitely something we're keeping an eye on. So absolutely.
Well, and I guess it goes to a bigger question that I've kind of been asking in related to this project since, I've joined the board, is that, really, I think projects like this, are best served, in dedicated lanes outside of traffic, minimizing the amount of conflicts with vehicular use in general. So, typically, I think it's not controversial to say that a dedicated lane does better than mixed traffic. But, the second we start making assumptions based off of, a model that I think is flawed with the way that FDOT calculates their trips and all their, metrics, I'm worried to see, both a combination of these inline stations that make a lot of assumptions that I don't know if they're actually true, combined with sort of a knowledge that, the congestion is going to go up. The impetus for transit in general is to try and reduce the amount of trips that we have on our roadway network currently. So, the sort of low ridership of what we've seen out of this relative to, other forms of transit, combined with a sort of unknown context of capacity and congestion, I think is really an issue for where we're siting these stations. Because I appreciate the effort you've gone to in analyzing them, but I don't know just how realistic the TOD elements are, for example, some of these stations, if a lot of these things are unknown and assumed. So I would just suggest that tread lightly with a lot of those, and especially with a regional trip that's 45 person on a bus. I don't know if that's going to generate the TOD that a dedicated lane might do otherwise. So I just wanted to throw that out there. So I appreciate the presentation so far.
Yeah, no, thank you for the comments. Duly noted, absolutely. In terms of TOD, I think where we have our greatest opportunities is where we connect to a host of other projects too, like the Heart Arterial BRT. I think that would be a great opportunity for economic development, because now you've got multiple services connecting at that point.
But that TOD occurs mainly because of the Heart line and not because of this line. So it's supplementary, which I think is a bigger point to framing this project in general. So that's all.
Well, it's something we're paying attention to. So yeah, we're still working on that. But another point, just quickly, I apologize, but now that we've got some opportunities identified, this kind of handful of sites in each area, then the next thing that we're doing right now is actually looking at, MLK is a bad example because MLK is a really tight interchange. There's not a lot of room there. But there might be other interchanges where there's opportunity to continue using the shoulder outside running lane approach down through the interchange, keeping that transit vehicle as far out of the congestion as possible, certainly using signal technology to get some signal priority for the vehicle once it gets down to street level. And and a great example in Central Avenue and St. Pete is, can we just use the bat lanes that are being developed for the Sunrunner when we're at street level? So we're looking at as many tools as that we have in the toolbox to avoid traffic, to be honest.
Thank you, Scott. Other questions?
Yes.
Yes, Carol. Karen, go ahead.
I want to go back to Bill Johnson's discussion of the Flatiron Flyer, or whatever they're calling it. I lived in Boulder while that whole project got started. I saw it go from like an hour on a very slow bus from Boulder to Denver to a half an hour. And one of the main reasons is that all the stations are in line and they all had a park and ride. And somehow making the assumption that all of the riders are going to be walking or riding their bikes to where the bus is, to the bus stop. I think that's wrong, because I think a lot of people are going to want to drive there. And I don't know if you've taken that into consideration in terms of park and rides or, other people who don't live within a 10-minute bike ride who really want to take that bus to Leslie Chapel or whatever. So anyway, that's my concern. When they changed the infrastructure of that very slow bus, it was remarkable. It was just remarkable. And it made it so I'm not going to drive into Denver and have to park someplace. Geez, what a pain. I'm just going to get on this bus and boom, I'm there.
Thank you for the comments, Karen. Actually, that's a perfect segue into the next section. We're going to talk a little bit about parking because, I think the guiding principle that we're applying to any of the conversations around the project at the station locations is quite simply is that there's no one size fits all. Every station is going to be designed in a way that it complements that particular neighborhood. So in areas where we know people are driving to, we're going to design it to serve that market. In neighborhoods where people are going to use it by walking to it or biking to it, again, we want to design it to serve that market. So with that,
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if there's any other questions, I can continue.
I don't see any. Chris, do you have any other hands raised? Apparently not. Scott, go ahead in the next section.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So yeah, no, I appreciate that, Karen. It was a very good segue to the next section. So, the next section, go ahead, next slide. So when we started the early planning phases for this project under the regional transit feasibility study, we just didn't have the level of detail needed to really make some, good decisions on the amount of parking needed. So what we did is we had a placeholder in there that's basically said we were going to have enough spaces for all the riders that we were forecasting for the project at that time. Now, as we got into the Regional Rapid Transit Project, the PD&E, and the first milestone, we started digging through some of the national research and really found that probably it's better off if we do one space for every 2 riders. But again, we recognized, and we spoke to the board about this, that those were placeholders until we can get to the point in the process that allowed us to get into a detailed evaluation of that parking. Now, we've got to that point, and I have that information for you this afternoon. And what we're looking at is vastly different than we talked about previously, where we're between 800 to 1,400 total parking spaces needed for the entire 41-mile corridor. Next slide, please. So process that we use to evaluate parking needs, number one, is data-driven. We use those national examples, a whole host of national best practices, guidance. I can share the references if anybody's interested. And that really defined a range of spaces per rider that should be applied in different situations. For example, in an urban core or a downtown area, the recommendation was that you have 0.1 spaces for every rider, because in a downtown core, people are using a lot of different other modes to connect to that service. Whereas in some more suburban type settings where the vast majority of people could potentially be driving to that station, they recommended using 0.8 spaces per rider. So that kind of set our range, but we didn't stop there. So we kept on looking through and digging a little bit deeper. And we wanted to make sure, again, like I said before, it's not a one size fits all. So then we started going in and looking at each one of these individual neighborhoods, individual communities, and we looked at things like, automobile ownership, walk, bike access, and then the final sort of cut at this was what we heard back from the public when we had our charrettes and our virtual charrette. And what we used is that public comment to either define a minimum parking need or a maximum parking need. So for example, again, I hate to pick on the Heights, but we heard very clearly from the public that they really had not a lot of interest in parking at that particular area. So we actually capped parking to reflect that desire. So next slide, please. So this is a breakdown of the automobile ownership by individual station areas. You can see, and I don't think there's any surprises here, but when we look at the two stations in Pasco at 54 and 56, those were some of our highest automobile ownership per households of all the station areas. The other high automobile ownership station area was the Gateway area in Pinellas. Whereas, especially when you're looking at Waters, Heights, downtown Tampa, Himes, even the West Shore area, the average automobile ownership was less than 2 per household in those neighborhoods shown on gold on this map. So in those cases, obviously, we're going to limit parking where we know the neighborhoods aren't really using their car to get access to transportation. Whereas we took the opposite approach, for example, in Pasco, where we know that the automobile ownership was quite high and the majority of people would drive to that station area. Next slide, please. So we also looked at what we're forecasting to see in terms of how many folks are walking or biking to a station. Again, no real surprises here. We definitely saw the heavy walk bike activity when we get closer to our urban areas, such as the Heights, downtown Tampa, Himes, West Shore, 62nd Avenue, Pinellas, and then of course, downtown St. Pete. Next slide, please. This is what we got back in terms of our survey results from the public charrettes that we had earlier in the year. And again, this is where we took this information and created maximums or minimums. So an example in State Route 54 in Pasco, everyone's first choice was 100 plus spaces. And the second choice was 30 to 50 spaces. So we were being told very clearly that, hey, we need parking up here because we're going to drive to this service. So in that case, we actually set a minimum of 50 spaces for the station area, regardless of what the ridership needs were telling us. Now, as we get into Hillsborough County, we looked at the public comment and created maximums. I made that reference before to the Heights, where we're actually capping the parking at 30, because the Heights community clearly told us they wanted, their first choice was no parking, and their second choice was 30 to 50 spaces. Whereas, as you work your way through West Shore, maximum of 100 spaces at Himes and same at 62nd Avenue. Next slide, please. So when you factor all these different elements in, what the data is telling us we need in terms of what we're forecasting in ridership, but then the automobile ownership, the walk, bike access, and what the public told us, you can see how the parking is distributed across the corridor. Now, we do have our largest parking need at the Gateway area. So that was in the Carillon area. Again, that was a high automobile ownership area where a lot of folks are potentially driving to that from all parts of Pinellas. So that was one of our larger parking needs. Whereas, again, the Heights, we actually capped the amount of parking at 30. Now, there's a little bit of a discrepancy, I think, in what we're seeing in the model, and we're kind of digging a little bit deeper. You're starting to see some of the higher parking numbers, although nominal, 100 to 240 at USF area. And some of that I think is actually coming from North Hillsborough County and Pasco County. So I think we're going to look at readjusting that and maybe putting a little bit more parking in Pasco and reducing the parking at the USF area. But again, you can kind of see the pattern across the board here with the downtowns having, the smaller parking needs of the lot. Next slide. Now, that's what the data is telling us, but that does not mean that we're going to go out and build 1,400 new surface parking spaces. The real goal of the project is to identify opportunities to share parking. So we definitely are very focused on, can we serve the need through on-street parking? Can we serve the need by working with the locals to partner with an existing parking lot, whether it's a local municipality or the private sector? And again, this all has to comes back to the presentation that Taryn from the USF Architecture gave to the board several months ago, where we're really we're following that guidance and making sure that, we're doing the best we can to encourage TOD. And a couple of other examples in terms of parking needs. Now, when you look at Sunrail, Sunrail today provides over 3,000 parking spaces to serve the project, whereas the 95 Express in South Florida serves about 2,700 parking spaces. So next slide, please. So what we're seeing now, and again, I'll reiterate it, and it applies to the stations as a whole, is, again, it's not a one size fits all. We're tailoring it to each neighborhood's needs. And what we're seeing right now is that we don't believe we need any parking garages. We feel between the shared parking strategy and the needs that were identified from the forecasting and the modeling, that we don't need any parking garages at all. Next slide, please. So I do see a hand raised. I can take that question, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Yes. My question is are you considering any further public-private partnerships? I.e., when I was in Minnesota, I was part of a specific project with MTC that actually partnered with a growing congregation such that the congregation purchased land for a parking lot. MTC developed it as a parking lot. It provided parking for the large congregation on their worship times. However, it also provided the parking was available for commuters.
Answer, yes. Absolutely, we are. That's a direct answer. Yeah, I mean, that is, I think, the best we can hope for. Coming out of this project is that we have this opportunity to partner either with the public sector or the private sector across all these different station areas. Your example about partnering with a church is a great example, because when they're having parking needs are not the same time that you see that heavy need on the transit side. So that's very complementary.
Exactly.
And we actually have an opportunity in Pinellas, the 62nd Avenue. There's a church right there on just the east side of the interstate, just south of 62nd. That might be an opportunity that, to that exact example that you just expressed.
Excellent, thank you.
So wrapping out the presentation, we wanted to give you guys a couple of conceptual design prototypes for these stations that we've been working on. Again, this is the fun stuff. We're getting into the details, we're getting into the design, but keep in mind, this is the beginning of a conversation. It's not the end. So this is probably not what the stations ultimately will look like, but it gives you a sense of kind of the direction we're heading from an architectural standpoint. We have 3 neighborhood prototypes. So this is something that would be at street level, either in street or on one of those parcels that we just discussed. And then we also have 2 inline prototypes. So this gives you a sense of what that station maybe could look like in the interstate environment. So with that, next slide. So this is that very small footprint. Again, you can see the iconic mast, which gives people an opportunity from the neighborhood to see where the station is. We would have uniform amenities across the board, real-time passenger arrival information, off-board fare collection, what other passenger amenities would be included. But again, this is kind of the smaller footprint prototype that you see here. Next slide. So this is a slightly larger prototype footprint-wise, but all the same amenities. Again, you have the enclosure here to protect the riders during inclement weather, and an opportunity to make connections between multiple services. Next slide. a different approach on that same basic footprint. Again, this is a neighborhood concept. You can just see the different architectural styling here. Next slide, please. Now, this is an example of a potential inline prototype, especially when we're in the dedicated outside lanes. You can see the picture on the left where you've got the alignment up on the interstate itself, where the boarding and alighting would occur. But then you have this opportunity to sort of engage that space into this facade as it relates to the side of the interstate, bringing you all the way down to street level. You can see the glass there at street level. There might be a possibility for some first floor retail, coffee shop, whatever they like. And then, we'd have to look at how to provide access to that, whether it's walk bike access or parking access, micromobility and the alike. Looking at internally elevators that could get you up to the platform, as well as ramps and stairs outside to get access. Especially the architect is not a big fan of elevators. He says they break all the time. He likes backups. But the one thing that they're very focused on was when you're up at the boarding level and you're actually, next to all that high moving, high speed traffic in the interstate itself, it was very important from the architect's perspective to provide that customer experience, customer comfort when you're in that environment. So next slide, please. So they were very focused on providing a sound wall that provided some insulation from all that traffic noise and provided a sense of protection for those riders that are up there at that platform level. And these are just some artistic examples. It really could be anything, but it could be anything from a living wall to an art installation or whatever, the ultimate decision might be. And the last example is still very much in flux. Next slide, please. This is, a concept that we're looking at that could be if we're in the median of the interstate. Again, this is a much bigger footprint, a lot more investment included in that, but you can see where the design team is going. This is fully enclosed. Again, it's about that rider experience, protecting them from that highway traffic environment. And there's really at this point, the only times where we would actually consider a footprint of this size would be at the West Shore Intermodal Center or potentially Himes. So we're only in the middle between West Shore and downtown Tampa. So that's the only time where this particular design would be appropriate. So with that, next slide. And I believe that's it for me today. So I know that was a lot, and I apologize. I know I did take up quite a bit of time this afternoon, but I thank you for that. We're excited to show you we made quite a bit of progress. We hope you guys view that as well, and I'll take any more questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Scott. That was great. Are there questions from the committee about any aspect of Scott's presentation? I can't see everyone, so Chris, help me out if there are questions.
Chris, you're muted. Sorry.
Bill Johnson, did you have a question?
Yes. Is the assumption of the stations that there would be off-board fare collection? So there.
Yes.
Okay.
Bob Henyon has his hand raised.
Yes, this is something that I didn't speak up in time on under vehicles. And what I'm concerned about is the appearance of the vehicle, that they not be bus-like. That Denver bus, the motor coach type, was very attractive as a motor coach, but it really looks bus. I would rather have something that looks modern, sleek, train-like, even if it's not articulated, so that it gets away from the stigma of bus to invite new people in.
Agreed. Understood. Absolutely. And that example that Bill provided for the Flatiron Flyer was interesting because in Bill's conversation with Denver, that was their intention too. They wanted the attractive vehicle. They wanted something that was sleek, something that was, branded and noticeable. But then, when they started looking at the passenger convenience and comfort level, they changed their mind.
Right.
Made sense now hearing this, hearing that example, because I've always kind of wondered why they chose that vehicle, but now I understand.
Karen Mullins is next, I believe.
Karen, go ahead.
Thank you, Bill. Scott, I just want to ask, at these stations, inline stations, or even at one of the larger ones, are we considering any mixed use as in stores or, something in the area that makes it more convenient. I know in the West Shore area, I mean, you might even tie in some of the bigger box stores. I know that's not an area that we're going, but I'm just saying it at a smaller, like a strip mall maybe in one of these locations.
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, in a perfect world, I think the ideal outcome is that we become part of a much larger development that is focused on the neighborhood, that provides that TOD, and we're just one aspect of that larger development. Honestly, I think probably what has the most likelihood to be an early example of that would be the West Shore Intermodal Center. Now, keep in mind, FDOT actually owns that property, the Charlie's and the Doubletree, just north of the interstate, and that's an opportunity where the RRT project becomes a part of a much larger whole, in which you have the opportunity for. We looked at some figures where, up to almost, an additional, million square foot of either retail, housing, or what, all hosts of different mixed uses. So yeah, ideally. For cost purposes for the project, selfishly, it helps us reduce our costs for sure, but it just makes for a much more compelling project when we can partner with either the private sector or the public.
I'm particularly in the West Shore area. I'd like to see it become a destination rather than just a station, so that we have a draw other than transportation.
Agreed.
Josh Frank, and then Bob Widmer.
Okay, Josh.
Thank you. So I just have a couple quick questions and comments. I think I'm looking at the presentation on my right, so if I'm not looking at the camera, that's why. But I think for the inline prototypes, one thing that sort of stands out to me is that I'm wondering, did you guys look at all at bringing the bus lane down to grade on those? Because I think I've ridden a lot of transit systems around the world, and every time I've ridden one that's been sort of in that context, those elevated stations get really gross and dirty with, carbon emissions that leave soot. I mean, I live close to the interstate and I get that stuff on my front porch. So I know that area is going to be kind of noisy and dirty. If it's down at grade, also, I think that provides more opportunity to activate the street level of it. So, if that is, for example, that looks like the Waters Ave area, that's going to be your highest mixed use density corridor right there, as you just mentioned for TOD. It would be a shame to lose that street activity with, just kind of a blank facade with a coffee shop in it. And there's an opportunity there to maybe make that a little bit more active and to share capacity with Park. So I would just recommend that if it's truly an urban mixed use context, that bringing it to street level does that, I think, better than keeping it up on the interstate. And then the only other comment that I had, a second piece to that is that then you also put the burden on the bus and not the people to get up to the bus, which is a big deal because all those stairs, I'm looking at carrying groceries, and if I've got a bucket of ice cream, by the time I get to the top, that thing's gonna be milk. So and as part of being in the city, I think the city rules should apply. And then the second thing is, I think that also goes towards some of these, the scale of some of these seems really large for a line that maybe isn't equivalent to, say, a streetcar station. That's what these look like in terms of scale. So I just don't know, if the ridership is going to sustain a business in one of these, for example, or, it seems like a high cost for a station relative to the amount of people that are going to be using it. So I would suggest that the neighborhood scale ones seem to be more appropriate for the line in general. So I'm a little bit dubious of just how prolific these stations are actually going to be, and if they need to be like that. I appreciate the effort, but I don't think that's maybe an appropriate way to spend funds for it. So that's it. Thanks.
No, understood. Appreciate it. Absolutely. We'll definitely keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh.
think Bob Whitmer would be next.
Bob Whitmer,
Oh,
go ahead.
thank you, Bill. I'm going back over my experience living in Chicago, where most of the commuter lines had park and ride. And I'm a little surprised in retrospect at what they're doing with 54, what you're doing, Scott, with 54. I can envision that as a station where people are commuting either for sports or for jobs and coming home and grabbing sandwiches or meals to go as they exit so that they can get home, have a drink, and relax. And for that, you're going to need more than 50 parking spaces, I'm sure.
Agreed. Yeah, I think we're underestimating, as you identified, the parking needs at 54. However, the nice thing is, working with Pasco, they're going to introduce us to the developer for the Grove. And I think that's a great opportunity for that shared parking strategy. They have a lot of parking there. Is there an opportunity to share the parking needs with that's already there in place? Again, selfishly, from the project perspective, it saves us money on building any new parking. So that's one thing we're definitely looking forward to and hope to get introduced to that developer soon.
Great. Sounds like it's on your radar.
Yeah.
Bob Henyon would be next.
Just a thought off of what Karen was saying about redevelopment in the strip mall. You might find areas where there are some old, obsolete strip malls, which could also add parking. You might have to redo the surface of it, but at least the base is built and the drainage is built to it.
Right.
Or even a former used car lot could provide that kind of thing and repurpose those kind of things and allow economic development to take care of whatever kind of businesses would want to be at that area where the parking lot was.
Agreed. A great example of that is at 54th and Haynes. I think there's some examples of some older strip type retail there that could easily be redeveloped, if the conditions were right. And not only that, but talking to the city of St. Petersburg, they're actually looking at a future, pedestrian connectivity up and down 28th, which is right there next to those parcels. So there's, I think that's a great example of an opportunity, just like you were just describing.
Right, because the cost of a new parking spot is, I don't know, 8,000 to 10,000, might be even more now.
It's expensive. It's one of the more expensive items of the project. So the more we can reduce that, the better.
Thanks, Bob.
Karen Mullins is next.
Thanks, Bill. I'm going into operations and maintenance. Are we considering security at these locations?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we developed is sort of a system-wide approach to all the stations in terms of security, Wi-Fi, passenger amenities, and that will be consistent from, across all stations. So there's going to be sort of a uniform brand so that people recognize that it's, part of the RRT concept, and all those, security elements will be included.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Chris, anyone else?
I see no one else at this point. Rick, I think Rick's raising his hand. Rick Richmond.
Hi, thank you. And just a quick clarification, I think outside of the regional intermodal centers, obviously, and also the inline, specifically any on-street neighborhood stations that would come about. Are we looking at joint use with other local transit agencies, HART and PSTA? I haven't heard a lot of that talk. I just wanted to know where we're at or what kind of discussions and joint use for those facilities.
Yeah, absolutely. The more we can partner with our local transit agencies, the better. Obviously, if folks are taking transit to get to the regional service, having that, direct connectivity is key. Right. So co-locating is a big part of that. I think we have a lot of opportunities for co-locating north of downtown Tampa, where the Hard Arterial BRT proposal is going in, and there's a lot of other activity, a lot of other local service there as well. So yeah, anytime we can, either piggyback on a PSTA project like the Sunrunner or support a future HART project, we should absolutely do so.
Okay, great. No, thanks.
Great.
Karen Mullins has raised her hand.
Karen?
Sorry, I forgot about this part of it. Coming into the 275 corridor between I-4 and the airport, are we making any considerations for high-speed rail through there?
So the alignment that's being designed to serve the RRT requires us to bring in a lot of fill in that median portion, because as I think everyone's driven through that area, there's that big valley down the middle. Now, we've made sure that our design plans actually are put in place in such a way that we will support a future rail project in that same location. And actually, it helps move to a future rail project when the need is there, because all that fill would be constructed under the RRT. So absolutely, that was a big part of the coordination that we were doing with the department and the MPOs and the alike, to make sure that, especially that portion between Western and downtown Tampa, they were designing it in such a way to preserve the future ability for rail.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Karen. Other comments? Anything, Chris?
I see none.
I have two comments, Scott. Both have to do somewhat with transit-oriented development. The first is the station designs should make every effort to accommodate our climate. I mean, all of us who live here know that it rains a lot in the summertime. It doesn't get quite as cold, Bob Hinion, as it does in Chicago, but it still gets cold in the winter. And to the extent we can enclose and air condition and heat those facilities, I think it would make them much more appealing to the customers. And the other part of that is that if those are enclosed buildings, that leads me to my comment on parking. I think where you can collate stations with existing parking is a great idea, but my sense is that you've underestimated the number of parking spaces needed if there's going to be transit-oriented development encouraged to be built around the stations. So I would ask you to take another look at that and look at the footprint of the station area, not just what the station could do, but what could be built by private developers along with it. So those are my two comments, but I thought it was a great presentation. Thanks, Chris and Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, and TBARTA definitely direct us to look at the very least big canopies to help with weather protection, just like you mentioned.
Yeah, good. Okay, if there are no further questions, Scott, it was great. It was a lot of information, good slides, and good presentation. Thank you for bringing it to us. You'll be taking this into the TBARTA board on Friday?
Correct.
Okay, very good.
Mr. Chairman, hey, Bill, I have a suggestion.
Yes.
Before we move forward, I recommend we take a vote on the minutes while we have a quorum available.
I have the same thought. I think we now have a quorum. Let's jump back on our agenda to the approval of the minutes, which was a consent item. Are there any further changes or comments on the minutes from the August meeting? We had one for those of you who joined us late. Bill Johnson asked for a verification. Any other comments? Raise your hand. Seeing none, do I hear a motion to approve the minutes from the August meeting?
Move to approve, Bill.
Karen Mullins, do I hear a second?
Second,
I hear a second. I'm not sure who made it.
Bob Woodmar.
Bob, thank you very much. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, I guess, Jennifer, we better take a
We have
roll
to
call
vote.
just to be sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, Bob Hinion,
Yes.
Bill Roberts,
Yes,
Bob Woodmer,
Yes.
Lynn Gruber White,
Yes.
Josh Frank,
Yes.
Richard Balcom,
Yes.
Leonardo DeSorts,
Yes.
Bill Johnson,
Yes.
Rick Richmond,
Yes.
and Karen Mullins.
Yes.
Okay, motion does pass 10-0.
okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Chris, for getting us back on track. The next item on our agenda is a presentation on Move It. And Paul Schultgren is going to make that presentation. Paul, welcome again. We're looking forward to it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Citizens Advisory Committee members. Are you all able to hear me All right, or do you want me to go to microphone?
I can hear you fine.
Excellent. My name is Paul Schiltgen from Move It, and I'm going to present an introduction to Move It's multimodal journey planner in our mobility as a service platform. Move It's patented multimodal trip planning technology provides users with the, and we could stay back on that screen, Chris. Doesn't matter. Move It's patented multimodal trip planning technology provides users with the best way to get to any destination using all mobility options in a city: public transit, ride hailing, micro mobility, car sharing, and more. Hundreds of cities, municipalities, transit operators, and companies like Microsoft and Uber license Move It's mobility as a service platform. Over 865 million users use Move It's free journey planning application on Android, iOS, and web. One mobility application to simplify journey planning and a technology platform to help with mobility as a service for all your local transit options. I encourage you to give Move It a try today and download for yourself to see how easy it is to see the best transit options in your community. Next slide. Move It is an Intel company and a leading mobility as a service solutions provider and the creator of the #1 urban mobility application. We create technology for people around the world to impact their local communities. Move It helps people everywhere get to their destination in the most efficient way possible by combining all options for real-time trip planning in one mobile application. Next slide. Our mission from day one has been to simplify urban mobility all around the world. We believe that mobility is a basic human right for everyone, where it opens up endless opportunities and equal possibilities, no matter where you were born or where you live. Move It is committed to empowering cities, businesses, and people everywhere to enjoy a better quality of life by removing the limitations and barriers to urban mobility. We're helping to create cleaner, less congested, safer, and better cities to live in, where mobility will become an enabler for people and businesses to discover endless opportunities. Next slide, please. We offer a couple different business models that I'll speak about, but we help people change the way they consume public transit to fully integrate all forms of transportation in the Move It application. Combining information from public transit operators and authorities with live information from the user community to offer travelers a real-time picture, including the best route for your journey. As I mentioned, I would talk about a few business models. In 2012, in the upper left corner, Move It launched our free consumer application for iOS, Android, and web to help guide people in getting around town effectively and conveniently. In 2017, we evolved and we launched a suite of mobility as service solutions that's helping cities, transit agencies, powered by AI, covering operations and optimization with proven value in reducing congestion, growing ridership, and increasing operational efficiency. We've created a platform that helps transit agencies and organizations with transit future-proof their technology for easy plug and play for transit offerings as the technology develops. On the right, industry leaders such as Microsoft, Uber, TomTom, and Cubic have partnered with Move It to power their mobility offerings utilizing our transit APIs. Next slide, please, Chris. Initially, talking about our consumer application, we focused on creating a product for consumers that would be the simplest and most intuitive mobility experience in the world. It's the ultimate urban mobility app. So whether you're riding a train, subway, bus, light rail, ferry, metro, dockless scooters, shared bikes, your own bike, ride sharing like Uber, getting the best urban mobility information is critical to adoption and using public transit. And Move It guides a rider from point A to point B in the easiest and most efficient way. So that the rider can get their train and bus times, they can see the map, they can see live navigation and real-time schedules, and making trip planning very easy while giving a rider confidence to know that they're receiving the most critical information, such as alerts or service disruptions that would cause some impediment into their A to B experience, while also receiving step-by-step directions and combining all those modes together. And so as you can see on the right, it's just an example of a trip plan that shows a rider the best suggested options. So it's providing multiple options that includes real-time arrival times, service alert information in the green areas, and then also ability to integrate with payment. And so as the frictionless and ease of mobility, a rider wants to be able to see what those trade-offs will be to an experience, whether they're taking the fixed route service or whether they want to take Uber or Lyft or use a different form of mobility that's available in the area. Next slide, please, Chris. And just to give you an idea of kind of the scale that Move It is working, over the years, we've grown to now serve over 865 million riders around the world, growing every day. And during the pandemic, we've seen a little slowdown, but our numbers are going back up to pre-COVID numbers. On top of that, we amass up to 6 billion anonymous data points a day to add to the world's largest repository of transit data, fully GDPR compliant, so it's aggregated and anonymized data, but it helps planning organizations or consultants like Scott and Bill get some granular understanding about where, when, and how people are traveling around areas. Next slide, please. And to go on and just talk more about our scale, Move It is currently available in over 3,200 cities in 106 countries. Our service in the application, it's localized in 45 different languages. So sometimes language is an equity piece that gets overlooked a lot on accessibility, where Move It takes a very focused approach to make sure people that speak different languages have the ability to be able to do trip planning. Now, we also, with our transit data repository, is the largest, most comprehensive, and most accurate database in the world. And this is due to our unique model we've developed that combines official data sources with AI and machine learning and a large community of local editors and users that gives some guidance to our system. This results in data coverage of over 7,500 transit agencies around the world with over 6 million stops and vast experience integrating with over 300 micro mobility providers in over 270 different markets. Next slide, please, Chris. And talking a little bit more about the user, because this application is for the user experience and making an A to B experience. We're obsessed with user satisfaction, and it's one of our company's values of user first. Something we're very proud of, and it's reflected in our very high scoring in the app stores. Year after year, we win awards for our application, such as Google's Play Best Local category in 2016, finalists for Build for Billions, in Google in 2018, and Apple's App Store Best of 2017 application. Next slide, please. And on the same vein is that we want to provide the best experience. We want to provide this experience for everyone, for an equitable and accessible opportunity for people with disabilities to use public transit. And so we're considered a leader in the industry for accessible mobility, where we're helping people with disabilities ride transit with confidence. And we've designed our application for one on the left, starting on the left side, individuals with visual impairments, where we include a complete voiceover and talk back support. In the middle, designed for people with individuals with hand motor impairments. So where we've optimized our user interface and designed larger buttons and hit targets. So if someone only has access and ability to use one hand, they're able to navigate this journey planning experience very easily. Finally, our users, we've optimized users with ambulatory impairments, where our multimodal trip planner shows wheelchair and stroller accessible routes. This allows users to plan their journey in a stair-free or a step-free manner to make that experience great for their needs. Next slide. Here's just one example of one of our users in Moscow, and this is listed on our partner Microsoft's blog. We've partnered with some of the largest organizations around the world who serve people with disabilities. And some of those partners include Be My Eyes, ONSE, and Right Here. So it's very important that we're reaching every user that can use public transit, enabling that. Next slide, please. And so that was on our consumer application. And so I want to just talk a little bit about our second business model, our mobility service offerings. And this makes it simple for cities and transit agencies, operators, campuses, and corporations to introduce mobility as a service to their citizens that's using a range of tools. And so as you can see on the left, we have the ability outside of our free Move It consumer application to customize or brand a white label or a co-branded application specifically for a transit agency and or a city, where we can help them get more control and develop more communication with their riders. Next, we have the ability to integrate mobile payments. And so as mobility as a service evolves, payments are one step in this piece to make this riding experience frictionless. And so within our application, we have an open payment layer that can work with many different mobility vendors in areas. Next, similar to, as I mentioned, we collect an enormous amount of data through our usership. We have our urban mobility analytics tool that can help with planning and looking at long-term planning, understand origin destinations, how people are traveling. Next, Move It has pre-scheduled technology with our on-demand technology. So as you see a need for more flexible type offerings and smaller type vehicles, Move It also provides that and can deliver that for a region or a transit agency. And finally, we have our automatical vehicle location solutions for fixed route systems, as we're seeing how important real-time information is. But as you can see, our modular platform leverages our unique assets that you can see in the middle with our advanced multimodal trip planner, access to the world's largest and most accurate repository of transit data, and understanding of the largest movement data aggregated from hundreds of millions of Move It app users. Combining all the available modes to be able to present the best options to your local transit riders. Next slide, Chris, thank you. And just as coverage, in the beginning I said, hey, download Move It, give it a try. And with our scale, this is our current coverage in the Move It application. So if you download Move It on your iPhone or your Android device, very easy to quickly and easily go up, choose the transit agency you want to see the fixed route service, run a trip from A to B, and see all the available options of transit to help you plan your journey today. Next slide. And I'll just do a quick walk through. It's very, very easy. And again, making the transit experience easy so users have an easy way to adopt transit usage. And as Josh mentioned in the last one, looking at the stairways, any friction in the experience slows adoption of usage down. And so Move It's Journey Planner allows a individual rider to choose the best route where they can plan their trip the way that they want them. Our multimodal trip planner shows all the mobility possibilities available. And again, going back to preference, that rider can decide what best fits their needs. It also shows viewing real-time arrival information. So avoid wasting time waiting for the next bus or train, helps with social distancing, and know your lines ETA ahead of time. Ability to set your favorite lines and stations and places. So locations that you use every day, be quickly and available to see those in an easy manner. Also, be informed about issues like construction, delays, and other disruptions ahead of time with the service alert updates. Also, as multimodal options in bike, we do include bike routes or walking routes along, so a user can see step by step, turn by turn, how to walk somewhere or ride somewhere, and then use public transit. Next slide, we'll give a high overview of kind of just the step by step and gives a user guidance on their journey, making it easy from point A to point B. We also have some AR where you can use the augmented reality wayfinder, hold up your phone and understand where your stop is located. Also, some offline functionalities, which gives view maps for ability to download PDFs for offline access. And while you plan your journey, you can click and it'll give you step-by-step where you will receive notifications when to get off your journey. So when you're on your bus, when you're on your BRT, you're able to, do some other things and it'll notify you when you need to go off. Next slide, please, Chris. And another option for organizations is not everybody has a mobile phone. And so Move It works with organizations and transit agencies to include a web trip planning tool. It can be designed for the branding needs of an organization, helps the local users see it can be localized for the brands in the area. So I know there's multiple transit agencies in the area. We can localize it by lines, by logo, but it helps a user offline using web if they don't have access to a mobile application to get what they need when they need it in a very easy manner. On top of that, Move It provides with our partner organizations origin destination reports for people that do web trip searching that can give some added dimension and understanding on how people are traveling in and around your region. Next slide, and it's my last, and I appreciate thank you for your time and learning a little more about Move It's multimodal journey planning application and our MOS solutions. If you want to learn more, our website's listed, or we have an email address that can answer any questions, and I'd be glad to answer any questions for the committee as you have.
Great, thank you very much. It's a really interesting application and got a lot of versatility to it. Are there questions from the committee, Paul? Chris, you're muted.
Karen Mullins would like recognition.
Karen, go ahead.
I want to thank you for a great presentation. It's quite interesting to see how you guys have implemented and kind of integrated so many ways of transportation. I'm curious as to how Move It makes a profit and where Move It is located, and additionally, what kind of data are you collecting on this application?
Yeah, great question. So I mentioned a couple different business models that we provide, Karen, and we started off providing a free application to consumers, anybody to download. We will do that for forever. Our other business model is our mobility as a service solutions that had the white label or branded specific applications that we can really customize, like with Heart or PSTA or transit agency, to develop some greater functionality of journey planning combining with real-time ETAs. So that's our second business model. Our third is leveraging some of our enriched data with AI and machine learning in our massive coverage. We license our transit data repository to companies like Uber, like Lyft, like Cubic. And then going to your question on the data we collect. And so with the phone, we ask the users when they download the application, can we monitor their usage while they're using the application and when they're not maybe using the application. So with accelerometer or within our SDK, we're able to really get some anonymized understanding where I'm starting my journey and where I'm going to. And so we have a data science team that's part of our mobility as a service offering that we partner with transit agencies, consultants like WSP and Tyndale that can help in their efforts to support regions on looking at for future planning.
Bob Widmer, like recognition.
Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Paul. Great presentation. In fact, I got so excited, I downloaded it while you were talking. And I live in Hernando County, which is one of the northern counties above Tampa.
Yes.
And I said, okay, I want to go to Brooksville. It says you're outside your metropolitan area. So I changed that to Tampa, St. Petersburg, and it still says you can only do Lyft and Uber. And I think on your slides you said that Hernando's, the bus is on here, but I must be doing something wrong.
No, so a couple different. So we break our coverage down in polygons too, and it was before I met with the team here. I've let my operations team know. So Tampa has certain coverage. If you're outside of that coverage in Hernando County, you have to select Hernando County. We will update that, or we could combine the whole region. Mm-hmm. So everything is in your region. With user notification, you will get you'll go in the right polygon. I'm working on it because I know that we do have 3 polygons in the region as it's down to Sarasota, So we'll follow up with the TBARTA team with that.
Okay, thank you very much. A great presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question, Bob. I saw that the bus was on the list. Yes, Josh.
I just wanted to make a quick comment and thank you for all of the work that you guys are doing to be inclusionary for those with impairments. My wife is an occupational therapist, and so I hear quite a bit about sort of how some of her patients have to struggle with even, you mentioned the one-handedness of the application. So I just want to say that's a fantastic thing that you guys are doing, and it's very, very much appreciated.
Thank you. Yeah, very important to us.
Thank you, Josh. Other questions? Comments?
Rick Richmond.
Rick Richmond.
Hi, yes, thank you, Bill. Great presentation too. I'm wondering, in hearing this presentation, PSTA and HARP had flamingo fairs to consolidate, and now we see this application, which is really kind of a turnkey solution to integrate all of the transit agencies in this region. Is that kind of the intent here? And maybe, I don't know if staff can speak to that. And obviously they've been invited here to talk to us. So is that maybe the direction we're looking at? Is there a trade-off from administration and having the third-party administrator? I just kind of want to hear the discussion or thoughts on that.
And I guess I can answer from our perspective. I mean, and again, our goal is to simplify mobility around the world. And so that's why we started off creating our consumer application. You can download that today. It can be used in Tampa. If you're in Austin, Texas tomorrow, you can pull up Austin. And so the universality of the application makes it easy for an organization to, one, we have some endorsement opportunities, or just to recommend your users use it so that they can use public transit in the region. And then secondly, the more branded type application. And as you can see, and Bob can see, that we have within our consumer application and how we need to kind of separate some different polygons. The branded applications give a region some greater functionality of what they want included. Do they want Uber and Lyft? HART has unveiled their autonomous vehicle downtown. And so there's different levels. This platform allows an agency to, as technology moves, to be able to expose it out to their riders, and then along with flamingo fairs. Rick, I don't know if that answered your question per se.
I think Chris wanted to comment on the TBARTA position.
Yeah, and I don't think there is a TBARTA position. I just wanted to clarify that with Rick. I mean, this is an information-only item. MOS is increasingly of interest to David Green. I know our planners have started to look at that because it is something that's powerful and can help unite our region. But beyond that, I would not read more into today's presentation. There's not any direction currently to want to embrace any certain type of technology. But I think it's important that we all understand what technology can do and the power of MOS. That would be my understanding from the staff viewpoint.
Okay.
And agree. And I guess to clarify, I wasn't insinuating either. I just, maybe from the perspective from Lingo Fairs, whatever that's costing HART, if they choose to utilize a Move It product, it gets a little bit away from the administrative costs. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. That's why I kind of part of the discussion where something like this could make sense. Obviously, you all have more of the details, so appreciate it. Great and very informative.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rick.
Yeah, Paul, I just want to say I'm in the right polygon now, and it works fine.
Okay, good. I know that we have some different polygons. It's across regional as we do have the 5 kind of county system that you coverage. I'll dig into it to see how we can improve that experience as well. We're continuing to make sure that the user experience is incredible.
Thank you. Your support line works perfect.
Good. Thanks.
Thanks.
And
Bill Rich here.
Sarah from our staff would like to comment.
Sure, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I do know that the city of Tampa is working on an RFP to hire a mobility as service provider. It has not come out yet, but they're working on it. And I know that phase 1 of it is going to be focused on trip planning, trying to bring all the trip planning under one application. Phase 2, which would come later, would, I think, take a look at fare payments.
Yeah. So, Brian, great. We've engaged with all the agencies in the region as much as possible, but are very engaged with the Tampa MOS project.
Yep.
Good. Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, it's Mr. Chairman, this is Rich Balcom here. Just wanted to state great presentation and a very informative information as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Rich.
Thank you, Rich. Glad you make that comment. Anyone else? Well, Paul, thank you for bringing this to our attention. Very informative, and we'll see how it progresses and wish you all the luck in the world.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, members.
Okay. All right, committee members, we've got a full schedule today. The next item on our agenda is the new business and committee discussion. Under members' interests, I had simply asked the staff to include the information on the gondola presentation that was given to the board. I know we're running a little tight on time, but Brian, if you want to bring the committee members up to speed on that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. So at the August board meeting, we received a presentation from SGA Alliance, who works for the Echelon Group. At the conclusion of that presentation, the board directed staff to work with Ford Pinellas on advancing an aerial gondola study. So over the past several weeks, Whit Blanton, the executive director of Ford Pinellas, and I have been meeting with a bunch of people to get a sense of whether there's support for the study. We met with staff from both the cities of St. Pete and Clearwater, as well as meeting with the mayors. We met with the deputy county administrator. We met with both chambers of commerce. We even presented to the tourism advisory group of the Clearwater Chamber, and we met with FDOT. So far, there seems to be widespread support for moving forward with this study, especially from the city of St. Petersburg. Mayor Hibbert in Clearwater, he's also supportive, but he can't speak for the rest of the city council. So he's invited Whit and me to come present on November 5th at the city council meeting. One thing we did hear loud and clear from both cities is that the take or pay option that Mr. Leclerc from Echelon has pitched is a non-starter. Essentially, Mr. Leclerc has offered to build and operate the gondola on the condition that a public entity, such as the city or TBARTA, would provide a backstop. In other words, that a public entity would guarantee Echelon so much ridership, and if that ridership was not met, the public entity would pay Echelon the difference. Neither cities nor TBARTA would ever agree to something like that. Whit and I, we've been discussing procurement options to get the consultant on board, and one option we're taking a look at is for TBARTA what's called piggybacking off of one of Ford Pinellas's general planning contracts. They have about 20 GPCs on board. The advantage here is that these consultants have already gone through a competitive review process. At the policy committee meeting on Friday, there's going to be a discussion of various planning studies that TBARTA could undertake using the different pots of planning money that we have. And this is one of the studies that's going to be discussed.
Good. Thank you, Brian. Yes, Josh.
Brian, just for full disclosure, I am on one of those GPC teams for Forward Pinellas. So if there is any discussion or anything that I would need to vote for, just let me know and I'll recuse myself from that decision.
Okay.
Okay, good. Any other questions about the proposed gondola study? I think what I hear you saying, Brian, is that you're moving forward to try to implement a study, and that would consider at least one or more possible routing locations, correct?
Correct. I mean, first things first, we wanted to just meet with city staff and the mayors and just get a sense of, is there support for doing this study? And then once we've determined that, Whit and I are going to, he has a rough outline of a scope already, but we need to flesh it out more, come up with a budget, and then figure out the mechanics of how we're going to get the consultant on board. Okay. Our goal is to have all of our ducks in a row to get things started by January.
Okay, thank you. I just thought it was an interesting presentation, and I wanted to be sure that the committee was aware of that discussion. So, Brian, thanks for bringing us up to date on it. Also, under new business and committee discussion, I wanted to ask anyone from the staff if they have any information they can share on the Muni code system that we're going to be using, or is that something that we're just going to be looking at later on in the year? Chris or?
So that is our new agenda management platform system. And we
Yeah.
will be utilizing that starting in the new year for this committee. We've already started utilizing it for the board and other committee meetings. So I had originally sent out an email saying that I was going to send you guys your login information now, but I think it's kind of premature. So in January, I will send that information out along with a recording on how to sign in if you have a problem. And of course, I'm here as well for any questions. But it's very easy. You literally will log in. There is a landing page that has information for you to click on, which will have the agenda, the packet, and we're able to vote on there as well. So it's just going to make things a lot easier for us.
Good, good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I wanted to bring it up only because the original target date was this month. I didn't want anybody to be panicking that they couldn't get in. So, okay. The next item on our agenda is board updates. Chris or Chris, you have anything to add at this point?
Mr. Jack, do you have anything? I have a few items.
I will let you go first.
Okay.
You know, before beauty, as they say.
That's right.
Okay.
I appreciate that.
Chris, go ahead.
I have, thank you, sir. I have an update. You may recall that TBARTA partnered with USERV in a grant application to the Commission for the Transportation Disadvantaged to provide cross-county trips to the transportation disadvantaged. That application was resubmitted on September 21st, and the CTD will be making a decision on the grant application on October 28th. The other item is TBARTA is updating its Title VI plan as a requirement of FTA. The Title VI plan addresses civil rights requirements, and one of the requirements of the Title VI plan is to list the ethnicity of the agency's committee members. I sent out an email on September 9th and again this morning to each of the CAC members to provide their ethnicity. Most of you have responded, and I appreciate that, but if those of you that have not responded, and I believe there is one of you, please go and check your emails and respond to that email. And the last item is I will be sending out an email just to get good contact numbers for each of you because of this question about Title VI. I sent out an email on September 9th and I didn't get any responses or got a few, and I had no way of contacting you. So I'll be sending out an email just requesting a good contact phone number. I have some of them for you, but I don't have everyone. So just keep a lookout for that email. That's all I have, sir.
Good.
Yeah, I never got that email.
And
Bob Widmar.
Yeah.
Bob Widmar, which email did you not get?
The
Okay.
Yeah, ethnicity.
Okay.
Yeah, my comment, Chris, is I would also ask people to verify the emails so that you're sure you've got current and up-to-date email addresses. I know Jennifer's got 99% of them, but won't hurt to check.
Well, Bob Widmar, you did respond.
Okay, that's why.
Okay. Good.
What did I say?
That's confidential.
Well, you responded with your ethnicity. That's all I'm going to say.
Right. All right.
You,
Good. All right. Chris Yaddick.
Thank you. I'll be brief. As you know, of course, TBARTA board committee meetings are this Friday again on Zoom. It will be our last Zoom meeting. The governor was pretty explicit in extending the ability for us to conduct these meetings electronically for one more month, with the idea being that public entities need to resume in-person meetings starting in November. So in November, I believe it's Friday, November 13th, we will be in Pasco County for our board and government meetings, and that will be the last TBARTA board and committee meetings of 2020. We will not meet in December, and then we resume in January. One other quick note regarding Envision 2030, it's getting some nice recognition. It received a first place marketing award from FPTA, the Florida Public Transit Association, at their annual conference last week, I believe it was. And equal credit goes out to Bill Ball and his team at Tyndale Oliver, because of course they were very much involved in leading the charge on that with us. So I want to thank Bill and his team for that. We also understand that the Envision 2030 plan is going to get some recognition from the Hillsborough County MPO at their planning awards ceremony later this month. So stay tuned for details on that. But as you know, it's a fantastic plan, and it's great to see that it's getting some recognition by the planning and marketing entities, not only here in Hillsborough, but also across the state.
Good. Anything else, Chris?
I do not, but I will make this note. Their next item is an update from RSA, but Ron Pierce had to move on, was not able to stay to this point. But he does say he's happy to join us for the next meeting. And so if we can defer him till the next meeting, he'll join us for an update then.
All right, thank you. I heard from Ron, and yeah, he had to move on to another meeting. So that item will get deferred to our next meeting in December. The last item under this section is the idea of a CAC workshop. And I asked staff to put this on the agenda, not to have a lengthy discussion, but I'd like to get a sense of the membership as to whether you would like to spend a short time, maybe in our next meeting, maybe 20 or 30 minutes, having an open discussion about how this committee can improve and better implement its representation of the various communities that we represent. I mean, we cover a large geographic area. We get a lot of information, a lot of terrific information from our staff about what TBARTA is doing. And part of our challenge is to relate that then to our own communities. So I'd like to have any comments you care to make as to whether you think such a workshop would be appropriate and or helpful. Any thoughts on that?
Bob
Whitmer?
Absolutely.
Think it'd be helpful? Okay.
Oh, yeah. Always interesting to kind of sit back and take a look at what you're doing and can you do it better? And we got a great bunch of minds here.
Yeah, we got a lot of talent on this committee, and we usually have a pretty full agenda. So I thought I would give us this opportunity. Karen, what do you think of that idea? You think that'd be productive? Karen Schwartz or Karen Mullis for that.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Karen.
Do I have my mic on? I
You are on.
I don't even know.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, well, as an alternate, I'm really not sure what we're supposed to be doing at all. So I think it would be beneficial, you know, to people like me who are kind of clueless. Yeah, that's what I think. What do you think, Karen?
I think it's a good idea. I mean, we do have a lot coming up and pretty quickly. And if we can get I love the idea of a workshop. How does the staff feel?
I'm always open to collaboration and better understanding. So, you know, Bill sees a need for that. I mean, of course, why not? I absolutely agree with that.
Well, if there's no, I haven't heard any objection. So
Bob Henyon would like. Bob Henyon has his hand raised.
I'm sorry, Bob. Go ahead.
I think it's a great idea. With time, my mind is a terrible thing. So putting some new stuff in it doesn't hurt.
Okay, well, let's see how full our agenda is at the next meeting. And if time allows, let's schedule a 20 or maybe 30-minute workshop toward the end of the agenda. And if not, we'll do it at our next meeting following December. Any other new business to come before the committee before we go to items to report to the TBARTA board? I don't see any hands up.
I don't know if Rich Balcom had unmuted his mic. I don't know if you want to make a comment about the proposed workshop or not. Rich?
Yeah, I did. I think, I think that'd be a great idea, even though I've been around on this committee for many, many years. I think, again, collaboration would be great. Good.
Thank you, Rich. Are there items to report to the TBARTA board? We've taken no action at this meeting today. Had some great presentations for informational purposes. Do I hear any comments that of things that you would like for me to take to the TBARTA board meeting, which is this Friday? And I'm happy to do so on the committee's behalf. Going once. Karen?
I can't figure out how to raise my hand. I'm on my phone, and
Okay,
it's a
just
very
speak up.
tiny screen. I mean, it's a big screen for a phone, but
Yeah, just speak up. Your light will come on.
yeah, okay. I was going to suggest that we don't do that overview of what the CIC does at the end of the meeting next time, because I don't know about you people, but after 2 hours of this, I'm like not paying much attention anymore. And I think it should be closer to the beginning.
Okay. Well, point well taken. Josh, go ahead. Unmute.
Yeah, so I just wanted to follow up on a few meetings prior. I believe it was Bob Henyon who mentioned starting an initiative of some kind to recognize transit workers in the area as a result of their, being frontline workers essentially. And I was just wondering if there was any follow-up on that, or if that's something worth taking to the board if we had not done so already.
I think we have taken that to the board. I'll ask if someone at the staff has a better memory than I do as to what action was taken.
Bill, this is Bill Johnson. I did include that in my report 2 months ago.
Yep.
And that was a recommendation that we were asking the board to consider. There's been kind of a uncertainty with the board report, as Karen said, having at the end of the meeting, we don't have a chance to make our recommendation before an item is approved. So we need to make sure that if we do have a recommendation, that we have a chance to share that with the board prior to their taking action on that item.
I agree. But I think to answer the question about the recognition of transit workers, Bill Johnson, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you correctly made the recommendation to the TBARTA board. It was well received, and I think they indicated they wanted to follow up at some point and make that recognition. Is that the correct interpretation, Bill?
I believe so, but I haven't seen that action occurring, so.
Yeah, nor have I.
And nor have I, and that's kind of why I brought it up, is because it seems like we haven't heard from home base in a while about that.
Okay. So could I ask someone at the staff to look into the recent actions of the TBARTA board, see if there's been any follow-up, and if there has not, let me know if I should bring this item back to their attention on Friday, which I'm more than happy to do. Okay?
Sure, we can take a look at that.
Good. Thank you, Chris. Anything else to report to the board? All right.
I do see Bob Henyon. Is your hand raised for this again?
Yeah, right, related to the recognition of transit workers out there. There'd be a lot of people, and I don't know that we really got any response back or feedback on the idea. I know a lot of things are cost prohibitive, but even if it were an individual letter of recognition, something that could go to them, I think it really could get lost in the woodwork if we don't ask again if they haven't done anything.
Good point.
So can I ask some clarification? So the question will come up, well, what type of recognition? Individual, a broad resolution? That, as I recall, it was sort of a broad, and I think we all recognize transit workers have gone above and beyond, especially in this era of COVID, but right. What's the committee's suggestions, I guess, is likely what's going to come back. And then they're going to ask this board for a recommendation. What do you want? What are you thinking?
I would think something like an individual letter to each person, even though we're talking a lot of people.
Every transit worker at all 5 transit agencies in our area, you're suggesting the TBARTA staff.
But I'm into overkill, so.
Okay.
I think I think, Chris, although I hear Bob, and I think that would be wonderful, I think that is a bit of a chore. I would certainly hope that the TBARTA board could pass a resolution of recognition to the transit workers for each individual transit agency within our service area and present that in some formal fashion at a meeting of the appropriate transit agency. How does that sound?
I suggest that would probably be better received and probably better use of staff time. We, as you know, we're a small staff, and I don't know that we have discretionary staff time to put to a project that's larger than that. But I think recognition coming directly from the board would be well received. And I see that Lynn is also raising her hand.
I think that's good.
Yeah, Lynn, go ahead.
Yes, I would be in complete agreement with Bill Roberts, recognizing the agencies in a formal resolution to take up staff time with what will be thousands of letters. We need to keep this as an umbrella.
Okay, thank you.
What about including mention of the individual workers in that letter to the agencies?
I mean, get a list of everybody, and I mean, there's
No. I just mean recognizing their individual transit workers as a class.
So recognizing, hey, this recognition to Hart and all of your employees for your dedication during.
Yeah,
I think that's certainly reasonable.
I think that's what Bob suggested.
Both Josh and Karen have their hands raised.
Josh, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, if there is, I can't think of anything, so excuse me for that. But if there is any, facility or something that could potentially be either dedicated or renamed, or some sort of honorary, this distinguished, whatever, put a plaque up, something just to dedicate something physical and lasting, I think would also be meet the sort of umbrella level and not an insane amount of staff time and resources, but would be something I think that's more of a lasting gesture than perhaps just a resolution. And I think for me, I go to something within the built environment. So whether it's a plaque or a statue or something physical that's maybe a little bit lasting and contributing, maybe it makes a little bit more sense. But I'm open to thoughts on that.
Maybe a framed letter to each agency.
Yeah. Josh, would you find it acceptable if I recommended to the TBARTA board this week that they pass the resolution and direct staff to deliver that in some appropriate fashion to the transit agencies?
Yes, I think that'd be appropriate. And if we can maybe get it emblemized, as Bob mentioned, and every agency can have a copy of it that they can present in their halls or on their building or something like that. Just something that I think is a physical representation is important than just sort of
I think that's a good idea. As long as you don't ask your chairman to personally individually deliver all 6,000 of them.
I do think Karen Mullins has her hand raised still, I believe.
Karen, sorry, go ahead.
I'm going to jump on what Josh said. I really like that idea. And if Bill's making his rounds to the different agencies, I think he should bring donuts and coffee.
My idea actually is I think there needs to be something that's visible to the public, like a bus wrap, or where it says your next stop is so and so. That scroll on the bus on the inside. Maybe it could say something like, "We recognize our transit workers." Doing it all in the house is very sweet and very nice, but I really think that it needs to be out there for the public.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I with my last comment, I wanted to mention we need to make it a press release with us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Jennifer, did you have your hand up, or were you?
No, I love the idea of a resolution. I just wanted to say, I don't know that if everybody realizes, but we do have a very limited budget. That's pretty much down to the T. So I just wanted to put that out there as well. But I do think, you know, the resolution maybe in a frame to each agency is a great idea.
Okay, good. I think that's a good start. And then if something later becomes available, we can do that. Bob Whitmer?
A possible idea is take a page out of the Tampa Times and put all the agencies on one page and recognizing, you know, all the work they've done during the pandemic as another possibility.
Yeah, but we just heard from Jennifer that the budget is limited, and that's going to be very expensive.
When I have to run a legal notice, just posting that our venue has changed, it costs us $600, and that's for an ad that's maybe about that size.
Oh, seriously? Okay, I didn't realize what
it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Wow.
The best way really to publicize it is to send out press releases and see who picks it up.
And I would just add, you know, another maybe really cost efficient way to do something is something I've seen done pretty quickly, at least in Hillsborough and the city of Tampa, is to coordinate with them and maybe say, you know, light City Hall a certain color for a certain cause to bring awareness, something along those lines. That's maybe not, you know, spending a lot of money, but just more coordination than anything. That could be also a pretty visible way of doing that. Just a thought.
You know, the other thing is we have a website, and you know, there's a lot of transit related websites and Facebook pages, and that's the other place that you can put this. You know, to say there was a resolution and explain the resolution. You know, I don't know who manages those things. It would be something that somebody who knows a lot more than me would have to take care of. But that's a very quick way of providing the information that there's been this resolution that we recognize the transit workers, and it doesn't really cost anything, except if, you know, if it's an agency that manages the online presence. Yeah, it's going to cost money, but no more than any other. What am I trying to say? No more than any other announcement that would be announced using that method.
So I will make a recommendation that the recognition be made. I will offer a couple of suggestions on behalf of the committee, and hopefully get the TBARTA board to ask staff to implement them the most efficient and cost-effective way possible. Does that make sense?
Good.
Yeah, let's see if we can get the Skyway color changed or something. I
There
think
you
just
go.
anything, you know.
Call the DOT, right? Okay. Anything else under recommendations to the TBARTA board? That was a good one, Josh. Thanks. Under announcements, Jennifer's been good enough to let me know that our next meeting will be on December the 16th, and it will be held at PSTA. So if you'll put that in your calendars, I'm sure you'll be getting a meeting notice well ahead of time. Anything else to come before the committee before we adjourn? Had a long day, a lot of good information.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yes, happy Thanksgiving. All
May
right,
all
everyone.
your
Everyone, thank you. What, Bob?
May all your turkeys be edible.
There you go. Well, thanks everyone for your time. Good meeting, lots of good discussion. Be well and be safe, and we'll see you in December. Thank you.
Stay well, stay safe.
Meeting
Thank you,
adjourned.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.